Well, I found another one, guys. This is the 2002 film, The Mothman Prophecies. It has a 52% on the tomato meter and a 56% on the audience score. I really don't know how this movie got such high scores. How it got anywhere near 50% on either of those scores is a complete suspenseful mystery to me, and I'm going to get into that. This one is completely rotten. It has Richard Gere, Laura Linney, Deborah Messing, Will Patton. Those would all be great actors, fine actors, and a lot of other fine movies. In this case, they're a complete mess, like this movie, and it's completely wasted talent. I don't know what they were thinking when they made this thing. The Mothman Prophecies, you know, it's got the same title as the 1960s book from paranormal researcher John Keel. I would recommend that book. Yes, I've read it. It's a classic from the 60s, but it's far superior to this. This is just in title only related to that book. This is a real confusing mess of different things going on. It can't even get its facts straight when it's trying to show you something that happened at one point in the real world. It screws that up too. So I don't know what they were thinking, but let's get right into the rotten reviews on this. We have a 5-star review from November 6th, 2019. I never understood the negative reviews for this movie. It is spooky and well made. Great cast and direction. If you like the supernatural and psychological horror, it's a must-watch. Well, it's like they're watching a totally different movie, this reviewer. I would say this is 1 star. No better than 1 star. This is supposed to be, yes, some kind of psychological thriller. That's what it's supposed to be. That's not exactly what it is. It's mostly a waste of time. It's mostly boring. There is perhaps only one scene in this movie that comes across as a psychological thriller. It's very effective. We'll get to that later. But the rest of the movie, its entire 2-hour runtime, is largely a waste of different things that don't belong together. Don't create a cohesive whole. So let's move on here. 4 stars, November 3rd, 2019. Visually stunning, satisfying ending, good relationship, strong cast, ambiguity of storyline was satisfying. Again, it's like they're watching a movie. I don't know what they're watching. It's not the one that I watched. This movie is about a man who is a journalist who works for the Washington Post. In Washington, D.C., right? He finds himself, after the death of his wife, he finds himself 2 years later driving out into West Virginia, having no memory of why he's done this, and just finding himself at this guy's house out in a rural area, and the guy has called the police on him, and he doesn't know how he got there, and that's the way this movie goes. And if that sounds kind of confusing, me describing what this is about, that's the way the movie actually treats the audience too, because the movie starts with this character's relationship with his wife. It's very strange. Him and his wife, they move into a new house, or they're moving into a new house, and you know, let me show you how weird this is. They have sex in a closet, whereas their realtor is standing outside the closet door. The realtor catches them having sex in the closet in this house that he's showing them, and they kind of like brush him off and close the closet door and continue to have sex. And then they've decided they want to have this house because I guess they had sex in the closet. And on their drive home from this house, the wife thinks she sees some supernatural creature in the night sky. You don't get a good look at it. And then as a result of that, she freaks out and crashes the car. Then it cuts to the hospital. They're in the hospital. She's in the hospital bed. And when they, I guess, give her a scan in the hospital, they actually find out that she's got some kind of incurable brain cancer. And in her CAT scan or MRI or whatever the hell it is, you know, there's an image on her brain scan that looks like the Mothman. Not only that, when Richard Gere's character John looks at the front of his car, there's a Mothman symbol burned into the front of it. Now, this is before the 2-year cut. You know, we cut to a scene 2 years later, and Richard Gere, his wife, has died 2 years before of the brain cancer, I guess, and he finds himself driving out to West Virginia to some guy's house, and the guy catches him inside his house and holds him at gunpoint and says, "This is the third time you've been out here harassing my family, and I've called the police." Now, when the police, the sheriff shows up, played by Laura Linney, she kind of just checks Richard Gere's ID and believes his story about why he's in this guy's house with no recollection of how he got there, and kind of becomes friends with him right away, and actually gives him access to her police files. And so Richard Gere's character of John, he can just go through the police files and search for evidence of why he's out there and what mysterious things are going on out in this town in West Virginia. That sounds crazy, right? What I described. It sounds kind of crazy and nonsensical, me describing it to you, but that's actually what the movie shows you. Yeah, so you're just kind of like, wait, what is going on here exactly? Now, the only part of this movie that works is, well, Richard Gere just decides to stay out in this town in West Virginia and investigate all the strange goings on. And at one point, he's sequestered in his hotel room by himself, and he gets a phone call from this character who's talking through some kind of altered voice changer type voice by the name of Indrid Cole. And Indrid Cole is able to read his mind or describe the inside of the hotel room of what Richard Gere's character is looking at in the hotel room. And it's very creepily done, and it's like the only part of the movie that's actually effective of being a suspense thriller, psychological thriller. It's the only part. The rest of it is just a confusing mishmash of different things that don't belong together. I don't get it. When I watched it, I almost wanted to watch it twice just to find out if something was wrong with me, if there was something I wasn't getting. But apparently the rest of the world largely agrees with me. And then yet here I am in this rotten review, and I'm looking at these 4-star reviews, just 4-star, 5-star, 5-star, 5-star. What is going on here? I have no idea, but I'm going to continue reading these and talk about further weird things in this movie. 4 stars, November 3rd, 2019. Visually stunning, satisfied. Okay, I read that one, I think. Wow. 5 stars, October 31st, 2019. It's a really good horror. This and The Ring are the best 2 horrors I've ever seen. It's really eerie and unsettling, completely underrated. 5 stars, October 30th, 2019. Everything aside, this movie is more chilling than anything I've ever seen. The eeriness is constant. The gravity of it might make you shake. Gere is better in this movie than any other of his. Laura Linney supplies what is a desperate reach of reality, struggling to help a man driven deeper into insanity. I could watch this movie over and over again. I first saw it 15 years ago, and it is just as chilling each time. Wow, I don't know what movie they're describing. It doesn't seem like they're talking about this one. This one actually has Will Patton playing this this guy that's living in a rural area of this small town in West Virginia. He's like on the edge of town, something like that. He's the guy who's, Richard Gere shows up at his house with no memory of how he keeps getting there. He actually becomes, now get this, he also becomes just such close friends with Richard Gere's character. I don't know how, it just shows this happening in the movie for no reason. Anyway, Will Patton's character, he describes to Richard Gere this weird thing that happened to him when he was sitting in his car late at night by himself, where it's almost like a UFO abduction of some kind. Richard Gere listens to this long story, and the movie shows you this. Basically, it's showing you what looks like a UFO alien abduction. It doesn't show you the aliens, but it just shows everything else, and it's left up to your imagination that it was like an alien abduction type thing. And yet, it doesn't fit with anything else in the movie. It's completely bizarre. Richard Gere just takes his story. Richard Gere talks to other people in the small town. Some of them tell him things that seem eerie. Some of them tell him things that are just long and boring. He's convinced something is going on. I don't know. It's very strange. He goes back to his motel room. He spends a lot of time talking to Laura Linney's sheriff, and of course, she's best friends with him, and a lot of weird stuff. Everybody in the town's suddenly best friends with Richard Gere's Washington Post character, who doesn't even belong in the town. It's completely strange. I don't know what's going on here. You don't get the sense that Richard Gere's losing his mind. You just get the sense that nothing in this movie makes sense. You've got a lot of weird different elements thrown together here. And the Mothman, this Mothman character that you would think, you know, this nebulous, sinister, dark force of some kind. Well, it has to be right because it's responsible for the death of Richard Gere's character, his wife. It's responsible for, she's played by Deborah Messing, by the way. Deborah Messing is Richard Gere's wife. She's kind of taken out of the picture early on because she dies in the hospital of the combination of the car accident and the brain tumor, I suppose. Now, the thing is, you know, this is confusing myself just talking about this. It's so weird and off-putting. You know, this dark, sinister force, the Mothman, is supposed to be responsible for Deborah Messing's death, Richard Gere's wife's death. Okay, but I wrote this down to help me out. Mothman, this sinister force, does the following things in this movie. He causes a car crash that ends up, you know, putting Richard Gere's wife in the hospital. He gives, apparently he's responsible for Deborah Messing's character having the brain cancer because it's in her MRI scan. It burns a symbol of itself on the front of his car, the car that was crashed by his wife at the beginning of this movie. It burns the symbol on a tree for some reason outside this other character's house. It abducts a rural, this guy living on the edge of the town or this village, played by Will Patton. It abducts him in some kind of alien abduction. It calls Richard Gere on the phone when he's in his motel room in this weird voice and convinces him that he somehow knows everything, that he can see everything that Richard Gere is seeing in this hotel room. It's shown in the movie to be at least partially responsible for not only prophesizing but causing the collapse of the bridge. You know, it's an actual real-world bridge collapse that occurred in the 1960s, and yet it's set in present day in 2002. So, yeah, it's shown to be some sinister force that has something to do with that bridge collapse and across the river in West Virginia that killed 46 people in the real world, but in the movie they say it only killed 36 people. It also causes Richard Gere to drive in his sleep or in some kind of trance to this rural area of West Virginia, to the small town, and bother this guy in his house. It does all these things, this sinister force, and yet the movie never explains why or what it is or what the hell's going on here. It's just a series of disconnected, strange events, and Richard Gere is obsessed with somehow researching them, and it adds up to nothing, except that at the end of the movie there is a bridge collapse, and the bridge collapse scene is fine, but it doesn't really make sense with the rest of the film or give you any kind of meaning or message. You're just kind of left wondering, well, what was the point of this whole thing? So that's why I'm looking at these 4- and 5-star reviews and I'm just like shaking my head wondering what the hell movie are they talking about. But let me read another one from October 3rd of 2019, 3 stars. It's interesting because it actually happened. No, it didn't actually happen. Like, they took some real elements of this bridge collapse that happened a lot of years before, decades before, and put it in 2002 or 2001 and didn't even get the facts about it right. They didn't get the number of deaths correct, etc. So I don't know how you can consider that actually happening. And everything else about this Mothman is just kind of a hodgepodge of alien abduction stuff with symbols, with combined with some tidbits that have been taken from 1960s reports on this Mothman sighting stuff in West Virginia. But none of it adds up to anything or makes any logical sense. Completely nonsense. Here's another one from August 22nd of 2019, 2 stars. Richard Gere gives it his all in the Mothman Prophecies, but the painfully slow storyline and lackluster suspense kill this film, which sadly could have been cut by 45 minutes. I'll largely agree there. There's like at least 45 minutes of stuff going on in this movie that is just people talking and walking around between places and having conversations that don't really mean anything. And even when Will Patton gives a pretty intense, although a little bit over-the-top performance of somebody that's been traumatized by some supernatural force out in West Virginia, Will Patton does this, but it doesn't go anywhere or add up to anything. It doesn't do anything. It doesn't move the plot forward. It doesn't explain anything. It's just there designed to creep us out, I guess, but doesn't mean anything. So I'm so bored that I didn't even get creeped out, because every time I'm thinking, you know, something will be explained to me, something will happen, it's just more boring stuff going on and more boring, dark conversations. Yeah, I largely agree with that review. Yet, here's another 5-star review from July 4th of 2019. This movie is drastically underrated. It's one of the best spooky films ever made. If you like the X-Files and stuff like that, you'll love this movie. If you like Rosemary's Baby, you'll like this movie. If you like The Shining, you'll like it. Must watch. I've watched it every year or so since I found it on iTunes. Love it. If is this a thing on iTunes? Is that where all these people are coming from? Maybe the crowd on iTunes that gets to see this. I don't have iTunes, so I don't know if there's some subscription where you get movies for free on iTunes or you have to purchase them individually. I don't know, but this I don't think is even on Netflix at this time in 2019. And this is a review from July of 2019, making it relative and relatively fresh, right? So, yeah, they're comparing it to X-Files and Rosemary's Baby and The Shining. I don't know what they're talking about with this. There's only like the only thing this movie has in common with those is that it has a running time of 2 hours. Nothing else is in common here. Wow. May 5th, 2019, 3.5 stars. A very good one. Nice plot, keeping the interest till the last moments. No, I'm afraid there's only one scene that holds interest, the one where Richard Gere's in his phone he's in his hotel room on the phone with some kind of supernatural character called Indrid Cole, which could be an alien, it could be a Mothman, a sinister force from a parallel reality, it could be anything because the movie doesn't tell you what the hell it is. Not a very good one. This is 1 star at the most. Half a star, one of the worst horror movies I've ever seen. Now, here we have somebody that's living on the same earth I am. Another 5-star review from December 13, 2018. Eerie and effective adaptation of Keel's book. I'm sorry, this has nothing to do with Keel's book. I've read Keel's book. Other than the title, there's no similarity here. But continuing, though the actual book is far stranger, believable acting, excellent cinematography, and masterful directing. If I was to compare it to anything, I would say it's like a great 2-hour episode of The X-Files, sans Mulder and Scully. Great soundtrack by Tom and Dandy. Wrong. Soundtrack. The only thing I could say about the soundtrack is it's a little bit intrusive and it's like always there when it doesn't need to be there. I don't know who Tom and Dandy is or anything about them. But no, the soundtrack doesn't even stand out to me at all. What stands out to me is it's very boring. Everything in this movie is very boring. If boredom is suspense, I guess it's very suspenseful. Let's continue on. November 3rd, 2018, 5 whole stars. Mothman Prophecies is the definitive atmospheric horror film. It's not easy telling adults a monster story with a straight face. In my considered opinion, Pellington does just that by delivering a beautifully shot movie using setting and location as much as the script itself. Richard Gere, Laura Linney, Deborah Messing, and Will Patton deliver stellar performances that really elevate the overall impact of the film. Alan Bates' brief but riveting portrayal of a fallen professor and reluctant expert on the Mothman. Oh my gosh. I actually had to read all that. And, you know, 5 stars, please. You know, they do mention one thing. There is a long, drawn-out scene of this professor that Richard Gere visits at the university, and this professor gives him yet another retelling of some of the Mothman Prophecy stuff from West Virginia. There's no point to it. It doesn't go anywhere. It's very boring. You think it's going to go somewhere, but I'm sorry, it doesn't. It's just another disconnected scene in a whole lot of disconnected scenes that are pointless in this movie. So let's move on. October 15th, 4 stars. Great atmosphere and cast. The movie feels real because the setting isn't too polished. It's like a real town full of working people with imperfect lives. Good jump scares and subtle visuals throughout. One of my favorites. There are no jump scares. I don't know what movie they're talking about. You know, if it had jump scares, I would criticize it for that. It doesn't have jump scares, so I'm sorry. It's like they're watching a different movie. Here's another one, September 17, 2018, 3.5 stars. Positives, it's eerie, mysterious, and creepy, always absorbing, and keeps you engaged without really ever understanding what is going on. Yeah, we agree on that one. Laura Linney is such a gorgeous redhead. The Alan Bates scenes, the Indrid Cole scenes were super creepy. Negatives, it's overlong. Also, it's one of those movies that maybe when you see it once, it's never the same on second viewing because so much is revealed, particularly the ending. Richard Gere, I felt, was miscast. I don't mind him generally, although blah, blah, blah. You know, I'll agree. They say right off the bat in this review that it's like it's overlong. Yes, it is. And you don't know what's going on. You know, they're saying they never really understood what's going on, and yet at the same time they're saying it's 3.5 stars. I'm sorry, but those two things just don't equate to the same review. I don't know what they're talking about. But I agree. I didn't know what the hell was going on the first time I saw it, and I didn't know what the hell was going on the second time I saw it, although at least I knew how it ended the second time, but still, the ending is kind of disjointed from everything else too. So, July 30th, 2018, 3 stars. For all intents and purposes, it's not a bad movie. I just find the premise to be flawed. You're being way too kind. The premise? I mean, what premise? The guy, okay, let's break this down. Richard Gere, he's in love with his wife, right? They just buy a new house together, or they've decided to buy this house they've just been shown. They drive home from the house to wherever they actually live. The wife basically gets killed because of this car accident. Then 2 years later, he's driving into West Virginia for no apparent reason, without any knowledge of why he's doing it. He gets caught. The sheriff's called on him. He all of a sudden makes friends with the sheriff and decides to investigate the creepy stories of people in this town. What does any of this have to do with the other stuff? What premise here? Did I miss something? I think I did, because none of that belongs together. None of that's like incited by anything. It's all just a bunch of disjointed stuff put together, and it doesn't make any sense. But I'll continue. April 12th, 2018, a big 5-star review, yet again. The conceptual pragmatism of the modern American critic and film goer will deny them the attitude and faculties necessary to appreciate such a film. As a lifelong student of dreams, I understand their language, logic, and role in waking events and synchronicities. And I can tell you that what was depicted in this film smacks of the syntax of dreams and synchronicity. If the Mothman is real, he likely communicated with his targets by inducing a state of physiological arousal similar to the kind of blah, blah, blah. What are you talking about? Like, this reviewer is some kind of first or second year psych major that thinks they've understood the key to everything in this movie. I'm sorry, but you're way out there. You're like living on planet weirdo or something. I'm just going to move on because this isn't the movie that you found. I don't know what you saw. 4 stars, February 4th, 2018. Good movie for a rainy Sunday. No. 3.5 stars, November 1st, 2017. For some unknown reason, I keep coming back to this strange but enjoyable thriller. An arresting soundtrack, stark visual effects, and the use of odd camera perspectives keep you on the edge throughout. It's unpredictable and just plain weird. All the ingredients you need to get thoroughly spooked. The script is just so-so, but stay with it. I think you'll like it. Stay with it to what? To get what out of it? There's nothing to be gotten, sorry. Let's check my notes. Let me see. Yeah, I've mentioned most all of the big problems here, but, you know... this reviewer is talking about, several reviewers talked about odd use of camera perspectives. Well, I had a note on that. Yes, there is like a peeping Tom type camera perspective that's done from the very beginning of this film. From the very beginning, like other movies do this too. And you know, it's really bad when they don't have this in for a reason, where they put a camera in a really weird perspective. Like, let's say you're standing in a room talking to somebody, like in a bedroom. They'll put a camera up in an air vent where you can just barely see through the crack of an air vent, as though somebody is watching these characters talk through this air vent somewhere. And yet there's nobody in the air vent. They just do that to give you some weird effect that you're spying on these characters for some reason. And this one does that too, with that weird, creepy spy cam type thing going on in several scenes. And it doesn't mean anything. Nobody's watching anybody. Nobody's sneaking up and peeking at somebody talking. It's just thrown in there to be weird. And it's not creepy. It's just stupid. So that's about the last thing left on my notes, and I'm glad this reviewer actually brought that up. 2 stars, June 22nd, 2017. An interesting idea that never really resonates into building any suspense. Yeah, the Mothman in itself, you know, where you're showing some kind of creature that looks like a Mothman, and most people out there are passively aware that, you know, there's some kind of legend of a Mothman creature in West Virginia or somewhere. They've heard of it before. They've heard references to it. And certainly the artwork on the box cover right here, it like shows you like a moth type illustration. So, you know, Mothman, obviously you're marketing this as there's some kind of sinister creature called the Mothman. Yet this movie never delivers that. This movie never explains anything. It has nothing to do with any Mothman character. You get a bridge collapse that's kind of prophesized by a creepy character on the telephone. Kind of, but not exactly. You have to read a lot into it to get that. I'm sorry, it's a complete fail. Here's another 5-star big review from June 20th, 2017. This underrated Mark Pellington movie narrates the incidents experienced by John Klein, Richard Gere, a newlywed journalist whose life is taken by storm after his wife's passing. As he grieves and tries to piece together the events that led to his dire loss, he mysteriously ends up in a small town in the countryside, Ohio, where he bears witness to a chain of unfathomable catastrophes, with one very disturbing feature in common. Slow-paced and shrouded in whispers, the film gradually builds up the plot. It's like they're describing a different movie. No, that's not what happens. Richard Gere, his wife dies, and then it cuts to 2 years later. He's driving on the highway. He ends up in the small, he drives through Ohio, but he ends up in a rural area of West Virginia. And for what purpose? Like, you know, this reviewer saying that there's a chain of unfathomable catastrophes. What? No such thing happens in this film. There's like Will Patton's character thinks he was abducted by aliens or something like that. And some other people have some creepy stories, like there's a couple of teenage lovers that were parked in a car and they got creeped out by something outside of the car that you never see, and they tell their story. These are unfathomable chains of catastrophes. Like, what movie are they watching? What movie is this reviewer watching? Are they out to lunch? Were they high? Were they drunk? I don't know. But they're watching a different movie. That's not what happens here. 4 stars, April 27th, 2017. Trippy film that really freaked me out, if you say so. 3 stars, March 6th of 2017. I liked that they said Racine, Wisconsin in the movie. That was about the only thing that kept me watching. Oh, so somebody lives in Wisconsin and they got a mention of their town of Racine. Okay. 1 star, February 18, 2017. Bored, didn't finish. Yeah, I agree. I think the first time I actually watched this was in the evening that I watched it, and I fell asleep the first time, I'm pretty sure. I mean, I didn't fall totally asleep and, you know, have to start over again, but I fell asleep, like nodded off, and then like rewound it a little and continued it. I do recall that. I saw it in around 2003, 2004 on DVD. But yeah, I imagine a lot of people probably just their head fell down to their chest and they went to sleep at home. Now, if you were in the theater and you had to watch this thing, I hope you saw it for a very cheap, reduced price. You got a senior discount or a military discount or something and saw a matinee, because, wow. I mean, there's cheaper ways to fall asleep out there. 4 stars, November 28th, 2016, a greatly underrated movie. 3.5 stars, October 8, 2016. For the creepy factor alone, this movie barely makes it into my recommendable list. Good cast, good directing. The story demands more questions than answers. Yeah, the story doesn't give you questions or answers. You don't know what the hell the point of it all is. Are we talking about alien abductions? Are we talking about sinister ghosts, demons? Are we talking about a Mothman that flies around from a cave somewhere? Or, I'm just kind of wondering why the character, the Washington Post reporter, even went to the small town. Why did he bother? And even if he did find himself in a small town in somebody's bathroom for no reason, wouldn't his first logical choice be to go check himself into a clinic somewhere or get himself checked out, get a brain scan for himself, go back to the same doctor that brain scanned his wife and get a scan for himself with the insurance he has from the Washington Post? Why did he decide to just hang out in this town in West Virginia for no reason and magically make friends with everybody? And why did they magically all make friends with him? And why did the police officer, why did the sheriff, why did she actually just invite him into the police records and let him just snoop around? What? Like, I'm not even sure what question I should be asking. 4 stars, September 19th, 2016. Richard Gere tends a hit or miss actor due to his limited range, but I actually really liked him in this underrated psychological horror thriller. Gere brings a compelling vulnerability to John Klein, a recently widowed reporter investigating the strange sightings of the Mothman in a lonely West Virginian town. I'm going to stop right there. He is not in a lonely West Virginian town to investigate Mothman sightings. He is there because he found himself there bothering a family that lived on the edge of town, and he had no memory of why he kept driving out there to bother him. That's why he was there, not that he was there to investigate this town for the Mothman. You're watching the wrong movie, or you're supplying a different plot. You're helping the director out by actually supplying a better plot to this movie, because that's not the plot of this movie. But I'll continue. It's pretty slow burn at the beginning, but once Klein arrives in Point Pleasant, the film never lets up with delivering smart scares and a super chilling atmosphere. The sequence where Klein is in his hotel room, there are no super chilling atmosphere, and there are no smart scenes, except for, yes, the one scene in the hotel room where he's on the phone with the creepy voiced character, and the creepy voiced character proves he can see everything in the hotel room as though he's in there with him. That was well done. It's too bad the rest of the movie wasn't like that, because if it had been like that, this would have been a film worth watching. But no, we got one scene in a motel room that added up to something, and unfortunately, it didn't fit in with the rest of the film. So there's that. 4 stars, September 16, 2016. Rating 8.5 out of 10. It's a surprisingly well-made movie that's scary in how plausible it can be, whether it's through psychological or supernatural means. It'll make you think twice before going to bed after watching it. Well, there's not actually anything supernatural shown in this movie. It is all psychological, so you can say that this is a psychological thriller. There is no actual Mothman to be seen. There's nothing actually supernatural here, so I'm sorry. 4 stars. I am positive that I found the bridge where the film was organized around. It was between the bottom of Ohio and Kentucky. I am positive this was the bridge. Could be. It could be that's where they filmed. It could have been any bridge, but yeah, it could have been there. It's not far from where this was supposed to be. 2 stars. July 25th, 2016. Really kind of boring throughout. I think the reason why they decided to cast 2 frustratingly boring actors together to headline a moody, supernatural, and often too clinical thriller was because Chicago had just come out in the same year, and I guess they assumed that Richard Gere was headlining his own return to fame. Truthfully, what I disliked the most about the film was the banality of the whole thing. It just drags, and I didn't feel connected to any of the characters. This overly long film. And it continues, yes, very much that's where I'm going to leave this. This film is long. It's 2 solid hours. It's boring. It doesn't add up to anything. It's got only one scene that's, worth watching. And unfortunately, it doesn't fit in with anything else in the movie. There's no logic to it from beginning to end. Nothing adds up together. Nothing makes a cohesive story. Nothing logically flows from one point to the other. The ending is there. The bridge collapses. Again, it's completely disconnected to everything else in the story. There's no following the logic from A, B, C, D, or anything else. It's just like a bunch of separate scenes that were filmed to be creepy, all put together, and they don't add up to any actual plot. So I don't know how this gets a 52% on critics or on the audience score. It's like they're watching a completely different film. This fails as a film. It fails as a psychological thriller. It's not a supernatural thriller at all. Of course, I don't think it was marketed as a supernatural thriller. But unfortunately, when you say the Mothman Prophecies, the Mothman is a supernatural legend. Prophecies, that's implying something supernatural. So that just the title of this, ripping off the title from an old paranormal book from the 60s, is mismarketing, and this is just a flat-up attempt to rip off and mismarket to get people to buy tickets to see this movie. It offends me in that way, and I'll say that this deserves probably a 16% on the audience score, to be fair, and I don't know how the critics could have given this more than a 10%. Just a solid 10% on the critics. I don't know how this gets 52. I'll never understand it, but I will see you on the next episode of Rotten Reviews.